Hey guys, this is Just One Guy, and I'm back here with another video. And today I want to discuss something outside of programming, and that's finishing the game. And what I've had trouble with a lot is finishing my projects, and I noticed a lot of indie developers have the same issue. And so what I've done to solve that issue is come up with this design document. And what this is just a simple document that's going to hold everything that's in the project and that I want to put in the project. So that way I can finish the project without adding a bunch of new features. Because as an indie developer, you're the programmer and the artist, and you're doing everything. So your time is the most important thing, and your time is limited. It's not like you're a AAA developer where you can just push back a release date and you have nearly infinite staff and infinite money for the purposes of the project. I don't mean they actually have unlimited money, because of course they do have a budget, but a AAA staff can delay a game forever, and they have a game studio working on it, so they have a giant staff, where an indie developer is just 1 to 10 people. So each person's time is limited, and the project has to be done by a certain period of time because you don't have as much money as a AAA studio. But what I noticed is if you create a design document and only put in the things that's in the design document, then it not only limits the scope of the project so you don't get out of hand, it also allows you to finish the project much faster. And I think this will be a great help to me in the future. But after making a couple of games, I figured this out, because with my last couple of projects, I kept thinking of new ideas and ways to make the game better. And so what eventually happened was I never got finished the game. I just kept adding new stuff. This just helps me keep control of the project and make sure nothing gets out of hand. And what I noticed is if you really want to keep adding features, you can just come up with a second game and then add the features into that game, which is what I noticed how AAA developers do it. Because if you try to keep adding features, it's just going to extend the length of your project and it's never going to get finished. And what I'm seeing on Steam is a lot of developers take years and years to finish their project, to the point where people just aren't excited about the game anymore, simply because they can't rein in the features or rein in the scope of the project. Like, you have to be realistic with yourself. You're not going to make the next Skyrim or the next Elden Ring. Like, yes, that can eventually happen, but that's not going to happen on your first or second project. You have to eventually ship something or finish something. So let's just go over the design document that I have on screen now. It's just a Google document, and the first thing I do when I make a video game is fill this document out. So of course, the first thing you have is the project name. What's funny is naming a project is always the hardest thing for me. So normally I just come up with a test name, and then one day when I'm at work or doing something mindless, I just come up with a name eventually. But here's your project name, a description of the project, just a brief overview of what you want the project to be, the purpose of the project, what you're trying to achieve with the project. Are you trying to make money from it, or you're not trying to make money for it? Are you trying to get attention with this project? Is it just for a game jam? What's the general purpose of the project? And I find that helps a lot, because if it's not really an important project, you could just get it done out the door, and then just be done with it, rather than trying to make it perfect. What stage of the project are you at? Concept, pre-production, or production, or post-production? Concept would just mean coming up with the idea. This is very important, because you need to know what stage your project is at, because a lot of indie developers, they won't realize what stage their project is in. Like, you'll be in the concept stage and you'll be producing assets while you haven't had the gameplay down pat yet. And I see that's a problem for a lot of indie developers, including me, because first you got to get like a core gameplay loop down before you start building assets and really building a project up. In fact, I'll just go over each one of these. The concept, you want to come up with the idea and make the idea solid. You're basically in the testing phase at that point. And then pre-production, you basically want to come up with your test assets to make the game, because what you want to do is get a good sense of the game before you actually make the game. So you have to come up with like test assets so you can get a good feel of the game. And then you have production. Production is when you start making your real assets and start ironing out all the projects and finishing the project. And then you have post-production. And for me, that will be gathering all the feedback from your players and just getting all your ideas in line, making sure everything in the game works. What platform do you intend to release this on? This is another big thing that I see indie developers mess up on. And mainly where this comes from is they release a game on PC and then they think they could just take that game and port it to Android because you have it in Unity. No, you cannot do that. The reason is because consoles, Android, and PC have very different UI setups, and you have to set up a different UI for each one. One of the games that really messed this up was Phoenix Point, and another one I'm playing, Star Traders. Star Traders is a good game, but the UI for mobile is terrible. Everything is too small and some of the functionality just doesn't work right. Phoenix Point has a horrible control setup. Playing with a controller, it's not really bad at first until you really get into it, and then you realize the menus are just not set up to use for a controller. Advertising. What's your advertising plan to get the game out there? Indie developers need this the most because AAA studios have an advertising budget, but indie developers don't. So you have to figure out that. You should figure out an advertisement plan beforehand. When do you plan on releasing your game? Well, what I have here is the vertical slice, the demo, and the release date. The vertical slice. When you have a solid idea in the concept phase of your game, next you should be working on a vertical slice, which is basically an example of how your game will work. And this will be good for getting attention for your game, just so you can show your players what you're offering and get them excited about the game. And then you want to move on to an actual playable demo and then the actual release. So these are what the 3 dates is. So a vertical slice is just, it's very important for an indie developer because you have to show people an example of why your product is serious and why players should play your product above AAA games. And then the demo is a more refined vertical slice, which just gives them an example of like how the final gameplay will look. And then of course you have your release. And these are just the dates on which you plan on doing them. They might change, but it's good to have a setting of a date, because if you don't set the date, then your project could just go on endlessly forever. Anything having to do with costs. How do you plan to make profit from your game? What's the estimated cost of your game? What's the actual cost of your game? How many sales do you estimate? What's the actual sales and money made? That's the boring part of game development, but then you have to be realistic with yourself on what you expect to make from this. And the cost could be like buying assets, paying someone else to make assets, anything, or it could just be in time. Credits on the game. This is just to keep track of what credits I need to put in, because sometimes if you use music or you use visual assets like pictures and stuff like that, you have to put in the credits to the project. So this is just to be a good reminder where you set it up here. Music assets, any assets that you want to use, just any notes on that, any sound effects, visual assets, what's the style of your game. Like a lot of trashware, stuff like that, they're really bad at this, keeping a consistent style of the game. But as an indie developer, I want to keep a consistent style, and if you want people to play your game and get into it, you have to keep a consistent style. The style of the UI, which is basically like, do you want it to be gothic, techno, what do you want it to be? Models, levels. This was something I noticed was important in my last game. So this is what I was talking about before. You want to have your pre-production models, and then you want to have your production models. Your pre-production models are basically placeholder assets. What I noticed when you're making a game, you can't really get a feel of the game unless you have the assets in place. So that's why I have pre-production assets, which just are placeholders, so you really get a feel of like how the level should feel and the scale of the game, where the camera should be at and stuff like that. It doesn't seem that important, but it really is important, and you really should get it done before, so you can get a good feel of your game. Also, it'll help with a vertical slice of your game and with a demo of your game. So this just tells me how much I'm done with it, so I could just see when I need to move on to the next stage. And then of course I have the same thing for production, and these are the finished assets that will be used in the final game. And then I do the same for UI, because UI I feel like is a really underrated thing that people don't notice in games. But what people don't realize is that your UI, the player is interacting with that 100% of the time. So while the player might interact with a level once or twice, the player is always going to be interacting with bad UI. So if the UI is unintuitive or bad, the player's going to notice, and it's really going to give them a negative impression of the game. This happened with me personally with Phoenix Point. Phoenix Point has a horrible UI for controllers. It has a lot of bad other issues, but the UI just really isn't set up for controller use. Any notes you want to make about the visual assets, anything you have to change and stuff like that, basically notes here. The plot of your game. With my last game, Evolve, Die, Repeat, I didn't really think of the plot until the end, and I realized that I had to write it down, and I was trying to come up with something quick because I came up with the gameplay first. So I noticed that is kind of an important part. So you want to write down your story here, well, the basic premise, basic overview of your game. Then you want to have the plot line out. I suggest you put all the details here, and you want to have any characters and character information here. So next I got data collection, because I figure like if you're making an indie game, after you get finished, you're gonna want to collect like a lot of data on who's playing your game and like how they're playing your game, just so you can make adjustments. Because with AAA games, people are gonna buy them, and what they get is what they get. But an indie developer, they expect your game to be good no matter what. So you want to be able to change something that sucks in your game as fast as possible, which you want to put under data collection. Like say you have an enemy that's just way too hard and players can't defeat it. You want to be able to change that within a day and make it easier, and then push out an update. Any notes on the project? Just general notes. Gameplay. So your core gameplay loop, what the player is going to be doing 90% of the time. This is something you want to get done in the concept phase right here. Because once you have that down, then you just want to iterate on it over and over again. Any mechanics explained right here. And then any levels in the game should be planned out. I don't really do levels too much in my game, just because I find it's easier just to make one level in one giant open world. But if you have levels, you want to put them right here. Also, with Unity, it's kind of weird with loading levels, and I figure most of the time you just don't need to actually change levels. You could put all the geometry in one level and then just turn the geometry off when you don't use it, and then teleport the player over to the next level, to the next area, and just enable the geometry. And I find it works better that way, because when you're changing levels in Unity, what it does is it destroys everything in the level, and then you have to just basically save a bunch of data and transfer it over, which is most of the time it's just more complicated than what you need in that particular time. So any items, this is I'm going to move to more of a spreadsheet, because if you have a real complicated game, you're going to want to put the items in a spreadsheet. But this is just an overview of my design document, and I find it helps me a lot. And going forward, I'm just going to be filling out one of these every time. For my old game, Evolve, Die, Repeat, you can see I fill one out here, and it's really helping me get the scope of the game a lot better than I had before. So that was just one of the things I wanted to talk about, and I thought that was interesting to show everybody and other indie developers, just to say, like, because this was some of the trouble I was having, really getting the scope of the project down to a manageable level. And if you don't have the scope of the project down to a manageable level, it can cause you a lot of stress, because you never know when you're going to finish your project or what level your project is at. Anyway, that's it for today. Thank you for watching.